Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are. I hope you have a fantastic day. It's SoulSaint here, and we're back with more of the Asgard Divide. We got Loki the Deceiver here. I'm actually going to go ahead and mischievously move myself all the way over here, and then, boop, we should be good to go. I have the pleasure of being able to showcase a little bit of the kit that we're going to experience with Loki the Deceiver. So he's going to be the 7-day login champion that you're going to be able to acquire. And, of course, I want you guys to enjoy and experience it for yourselves. So we're going to break it down, and I'll give you guys my honest opinion about whether this champion is going to be viable, how we can use him, and to what end can we enjoy experiencing this champion. So, with that being said, let's break it down. Loki the Deceiver. He is going to be a legendary spirit support champion. You heard it right, support. So I'm expecting utility, like I said before in our preview video that talked about the updates that are coming along in the game, including the new event dungeon that we're going to be experiencing. Loki, the Deceiver, he's going to be the Flames of Mischief, his A1. It's going to attack all enemies, has a 30% chance of increasing the duration of all enemy debuffs by 1 turn. So it's buff removal in a sense, but not polyable, which is really good. But it's only by 1 turn. If this champion is under Veil or Perfect Veil, has the chance increased to 50%. Now, this is the base form of it. When you book it all the way up, it has an increase of damage by 10%, but then also you have the level 3 and level 4 where you get 20% in total. So it goes from 30 to 40 and then 50 initially, and then if it's under Veil, 60 and 70 respectively to have a chance to be able to remove or to decrease or increasing the duration of all enemy debuffs. So not buff removal, forgive me here. It's debuff increase, so longer uptime on those debuffs. Deceiver's Gambit, 4-turn cooldown. It is bookable down to a 3-turn cooldown. Has a select a target. If the target is an enemy, has a 75% chance of placing a block active skills and a block debuff for 2 turns. So it's 2 debuffs. If the champion using this skill is under a Veil or Perfect Veil, though, it also applies a debuff spread to all enemies, basically taking 2 random debuffs from the target and placing them across the board, right? If the target is an ally in this particular case, though, because this is a very versatile ability, it heals that champion or that target by 50% of this champion's maximum HP. That's a lot. That is a lot. So it scales off of Loki, which you can manipulate his HP stats, and then pass that on for higher HP values in terms of healing to maybe your DPS that got hurt a little bit, or something along those lines to bring them back up to full health almost, or then some, who knows. But it also places a Perfect Veil on them for 2 turns. If this champion, though, so happens to be under Veil, so we're talking about Loki, or Perfect Veil, it also provides a buff spread effect, taking a random buff from the target and placing it on enemies. Excuse me, I got to clarify here. We got to read this together. If the champion is under a Veil, so the target that we're targeting to heal, if they are also under Veil or Perfect Veil, you give them a buff spread, taking a random buff from the target and placing it on all allies. So basically, it's another iteration of our buff spread ability, which is very, very strong if you use it in the right scenarios. But very interesting nevertheless. It has that 75% chance that we were talking about earlier, can be booked up to 100% chance for the block buffs and the block active skills, which can be very useful in areas like Hydra. PvP wise, although you are polyprone with both block actives and block buffs initially, if they do land, being able to not only place that but spreading it is very, very valuable in the aspect of being able to lock down the enemy team. So not only are they not able to use their abilities, they're not able to buff themselves or keep themselves going and sustain and maybe outlive that active skill issue, which is very, very possible. And then, of course, being able to play supportive on that side, too, is also really, really strong. With that being said, it's going to be on a 3-turn cooldown when it's fully booked, which is also not too bad. That's on par for most abilities, you know, from an A2 and A3 standpoint. So let's see what else he's got. He's got Bandit Flash, his A3. It's a 5-turn cooldown. Has a 75% chance of stealing all buffs from a target enemy. 1 target. And then 100% of their turn meter is also stolen. Think about Armand's, but from one champion, 100% of it. These effects cannot be resisted, though, if this champion is under Veil or Perfect Veil. So, here's the thing that's very interesting about this champion. Now, the block active skills and the block buff part of his kit so far seems to be accuracy dependent. This part, as long as the condition is met that Loki is under Veil or Perfect Veil, it cannot be resisted. That means that you don't need accuracy for that part to be able to remove buffs, or steal buffs in this case. It's keyword steal. It's very important to note. And then, of course, reducing their turn meter or stealing their turn meter, which is also another thing too. That cannot be ignored. It cannot be resisted. There's nothing that could stop that from happening, unfortunately. And that's very powerful. Irresistible effects which don't have ways to deter it are very, very strong in today's meta. Think Siphi's A1, for example, where as long as they don't have block debuff, she's always going to guarantee get that sleep off. Now, keep in mind, because it says stealing all buffs, that is polyproccable. The turn meter removal, though, is not bad, too, as well. That'll help you kind of maintain control of the fight and maybe push your team ahead, especially if you're worried about, you know, speed tunes and whatnot, or if you're trying to give yourself an advantage to be able to manipulate getting other champions in, and that's that break point that gives you a little bit somewhere to, like that in-betweener that helps you keep the team going. Now, here's the thing. If the turn meter was not stolen, this champion fills the turn meter of all the allies on his team by 15% instead. So think of it as like a mini turn meter boost. Then, on top of that, it also places a 50% increase attack buff on all allies for 2 turns. So no matter what, you're setting up your team to get involved and get active and get very strong into the fight, which is very strong in today's meta. So not only is he a buffer, a booster, he's a control champion in the spectrum that he's able to strip and reduce turn meter. That's a lot in one ability. It is on a 5-turn cooldown. It is bookable to a 100% chance, but when it's fully booked, it'll be down to a 4-turn cooldown. So being a strong ability like this, 4 turns may be the way to balance him out. So I think I'm okay with that so far. Now, his passive, Misstep. It's on a 4-turn cooldown, which is interesting. It means it has an active or a trigger effect in it. It places a perfect veil buff on this champion for 2 turns at the start of each round. Also places a perfect veil buff on this champion for 1 turn whenever their HP drops below 50%. So, each round, that's a key word right there. That means that, like, if you're going into wave content, he's going to get it every single time you transfer into the next wave or the next round. But if you're looking at battles of attrition where battles are going on the distance, like PvP, for example, it's not every turn that he gets. It's only for that initial starting point, and that's it. Because PvP windows only have 1 round. PvE content, like Dragon, for example, has 3 rounds. PvE content like Hydra is 1 round. So it's important to note that, like, he's going to have that initially, and that's it. And the only time that he would be able to reacquire it is if he drops below 50% HP. Now, it also has a 15% chance to evade. Stop. Evade an enemy skill and all of its accompanying effects. If this champion is under a veil or perfect veil buff, the chance to evade is increased to 30%. Now, evade means that, like, any effect that would happen by an enemy skill or accompanying effects related to it can just straight up not happen. That's a blanket 15% that he brings to the table. And then if he's under veil, it amps up to 30%. It increases the chance to 30%. Then you have an active trigger whenever this champion does go below 50 HP, maybe from damage or something along those lines. When targeted specifically by an enemy skill, so it is a little conditional, it has a 100% chance to trigger an evade of that skill and all of its accompanying effects. This guaranteed evade will then finally go on cooldown. So that's where that 4-turn cooldown effect goes into play. Not bad. So if he's about to go, or if he is under 50%, when he's targeted by an enemy skill, 1 time for 4 turns, he's able to just say no. And that stops that ability. And I think that's very, very strong. That's very dangerous in the right scenarios where you just need that ability to get in and do your thing. And that one nuker that was going to stop you, you completely deter what he's about to do, and you're able to survive. Then you turn the fight in your favor, and then you maybe win the fight, right? That could be very strong. There's a lot of potential with this guy. Now, as always, I had to be very not promiscuous, but very precautious about saying that we don't want to be too premature with our speculatory senses when it comes to champions. But I will say that he does bring something unique. I think this is going to be one of our first experiences with Evade. That's the new thing that he's bringing to the table. Is he going to be viable? I think that's going to be something that's going to be conditional to the experience and the battle itself. I think as a preemptive measure, he does have some things that allow him to automatically control the fight initially. Think like how Armand thinks with being able to buff remove and being able to reduce turn meter. It's very, very oppressive, right? So him being able to do that, and not only that too, he's stealing that turn meter, which basically if he's stealing 100% of maybe the fastest champion on the enemy team and they're about to go next, he basically automatically gives himself another turn for the most part, which or pretty close to it. So he's actually pushing himself into the fight yet again, which means that although it's on a 4-turn cooldown, it may be kind of more of like a 3-turn cooldown because he's automatically giving himself another turn on top of that. Could be very, very useful there. Now, with that being said, he is still polyprone, so like from a PvP perspective, here's how I could see him being used. In the meta for PvP right now, there are some comps that lean towards like bomb-centric type experiences. So you place bombs, maybe think Astrolith, for example, on a champion, and then you spread that debuff to other champions. Think of Vizier, maybe to Hanorak. Even if Loki doesn't have any accuracy whatsoever and you're playing towards the irresistible factor from Bandit Flash, you can still get good value out of the debuff spread, because I believe, if my understanding is correctly, buffs that, or debuffs that have some kind of accuracy department or no accuracy revolvement, like if it's irresistible, like Astrolith, for example, then the same criteria to be able to spread that debuff to other people is also applied when Loki tries to put his debuff spread. So, if you think about it this way, if it's irresistible, which doesn't require any type of accuracy, then when he goes for the debuff spread, that same requirement, which is no requirement, will also still go into effect, allowing him to spread the debuff. Now, if you're looking at debuffs that require accuracy, for example, like block buffs from another champion, and then trying to spread that out across the board, then whatever the accuracy requirement was that the champion had at the time will still also be placed on Loki. So if there's an accuracy resistance check, then you need to have the prerequisite accuracy on Loki to be able to turn that debuff and spread it accordingly to the targets that it's being applied to. So there's a lot of capability there from a PvP standpoint of being a debuff spreader. Control champion, it's obviously there. And then, of course, being able to have the ability to buff strip is very strong in today's meta, especially since we're in heavy stone skin. So a lot of viability in that regard. In PvE, this is where his build would shift a little bit, because it won't be irresistible from that standpoint, from an A2 perspective. Being able to do block buffs, like for example in Hydra, is very valuable. If you are looking for someone, you don't have that Uko or Ugo or Sun Wukong or Lazarius, I'll use that as an example because that's one of the champions I use currently. As a couple of the focal points of options you could use for block buffs, this champion could do it. And then on top of that too, he brings an extra value of being able to do a debuff spread. So think about Tahanarak in some sense and how he's able to apply that too. That's not very bad at all. And then of course being able to veil himself whenever he goes under health is not bad, although it would be nice that he could trigger it on his own to refresh it to give him that viability. Could be really nice. But he could also get it from a complementary other outlet and then maintain it that way too as well. Being able to do buff spread himself too if he's targeting from like a supportive standpoint, which is really versatile. I like that aspect about him. Allows him to be maybe a complementary champion towards giving more support. You could think like healing and placing a perfect veil on themselves. I think he could place it on himself actually with the A2. If the target is an ally or this champion, so he could target himself, it heals himself, and then also places a perfect veil on him. So he is able to establish his perfect veil. So that's really, really versatile in the aspect of keeping all the elements that veil is valuable into his character, and he has that control to be able to give it to himself or to other champions as well. But being able to buff spread it too as well, which is very valuable in Hydra. Veil is a great counter to Torment, and it gives you a lot of capability of being able to avoid that fear altogether. Which is one really, really valuable resource. And it's on a 3-turn cooldown. Maybe with a champion that also is able to extend that duration, gives you that good complementary uptime. So this champion is very versatile in those two departments, and I think that's very, very good. Could he end up on other people's meta, on teams? And I'm going to be honest with you when I say this. He does at least 2 or 3 things in one. I want you to think a buffer, because he does do increased attack. He also does a veil, then spreads it. And every single one of those buffs, if you have some complementary sets that give you some value from having buffs, could make him a very valuable outlet for your team. Being able to be a block buff champion is very valuable for the team for Hydra. So this guy is definitely going to be capable from a Hydra standpoint, and I think that's going to be really, really cool to see. And then on top of that, he's a little bit more of a strong support. And if you build him in a, maybe if we go another route, a set where, like, you know, maybe you don't have a lot of hexes, maybe you're on your way to Mithrala. His A1 has AoE on it where it attacks all enemies, which gives you a chance to maybe apply that stun set if you're using him from a utility standpoint, or that provoke for Hydra, or that hex to give your team more outlets for that. This champion has a lot to offer in that regard, and I think that's very important to keep in mind. You gotta look at it from both angles, both PvP and PvE. Now, in general, outside of that, in terms of like other content of the game, those are the areas that I think that like block buffs, block active skills are very valuable, and that's PvP and Hydra. Veil is great across the board. It gives passive mitigation, so Obviously, a good choice everywhere. Being also able to heal people is good everywhere. Although it's a singular target, which is okay, still, it's good for spot checking. Maybe you have someone who is tanking something pretty aggressive, like a Provoker, and you need to keep him alive so that he can hold that control. Having someone like Loki to be able to do Deceiver's Gambit on that champion to keep him going is very valuable. With that being said, the last thing I didn't talk about is to complement it all off, even though we talked about some uses of not using accuracy builds and then some uses of using accuracy builds, he does bring an aura, in case you do decide to go that outlet, where he increases all allies' accuracy in all battles by 60, which is not too bad. It's not top of the line, but it's still right there on the solid middle ground, above average aspect of accuracy auras. So, this champion is not bad at all. I don't know what you guys think. I think that there's a lot of potential that we can explore. But as always, I would like to leave it to you. What do you think? I gave my 2 pennies to some areas that I think would be pretty vital for him to maybe have some potential in. Am I missing a dungeon in particular? You guys let me know. And with that being said, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know what you guys think about this. And as always, always remember, stay ascended.
Creep together, yeah.